Hey, it's James Murray. I'm in the Net News Ledger newsroom. We're here with Dr. David Robertson, who's an economics professor from Laurentien University, and we're talking about climate change. Dr. Robertson, what do our readers and viewers need to know about the issue of climate change as it sits in Ontario today?
Well, I think the most interesting thing is the huge shift in public opinion that seems to be happening. The scientists have been clear for years. There's never, for the last 15 years, there hasn't been a serious question in the scientific community. I know you've probably got trolls who jump every time someone says that, but the truth is the scientific argument's gone. I'm an economist, and as an economist, I don't take my fellow economists' teeth out. I don't take their tonsils out because I trust experts to tell me or to do that for me. I do the economics. So the first thing is I just accept what the vast majority of scientists have shown repeatedly. The second thing is I think the consensus has shifted to the view that, in fact, we have to tax carbon. There's a few holdouts on this issue, like the federal government, but provincial governments across Canada, the Americans, even the Chinese are moving in that direction now. So that's one of the biggest changes you see in the business press, that the oil companies want to see carbon taxed. And they don't want their bottom line cut by that, but they figure they need it if they're going to survive. So the political situation is shifting really fast right now.
Do you think that the federal government is seeing that shift, or do you think it'll be like an economic voter tsunami that hits them in an election?
I think that's the most interesting question. I mean, a rough description of Canada right now is really it is Mr. Harper and his cabinet that are holding back the tide. And there's lots of signs that there are a lot of people in the Conservative Party who want to change their policy, that they know they're going to be swept away by an electoral tsunami around this issue. They're very worried. I talk to Conservatives here who say, well, I've been a Conservative for 30 years, but really I support the Green Party. These are major donors. So the problem that is probably going on in the back rooms of the Conservative Party is what do you do when you have one man who is so thoroughly committed to not doing anything and your electoral base now wants to do something? I think that's really interesting politically, but I can't tell you what will happen. Harper could go. Or, like Paul on the road to Damascus, he could be struck by lightning, fall off his horse, and stand up a new man.
Well, the interesting part probably for those of us in Ontario will be watching British Columbia, which seems to have a shift going on, and it's all over the Gateway Pipeline, heading to the coast and going through some very environmentally sensitive areas, coupled with First Nation land claim issues and a Supreme Court decision.
Right.
The world is meeting on climate this week. What do you think is going to come out of that?
I've been trying to figure this out. There are 1,200 people, 12,000 people, registered for that event. The paper I've been trying to get through, if you stacked it up, it would probably go from the floor to the ceiling here. And it's full of what look like really wishy-washy proposals. And yet, and of course, all they're really doing is they're writing the proposals for the next meeting. They're writing their targets or how they want to get to 2020. They're not actually talking about changes for this year. So in some sense, not much is going to come out of this. In another sense, we've come into this with both the U.S. and China having suddenly announced targets that are entirely feasible for them, and they probably want to do anyway, but they were the big holdouts. So what we could see starting to come out is a change from what's a very weak voluntary process to the beginning of an agreement to enforce carbon emissions limits. And you ask, well, how could you do that? Well, if both China and the U.S. decided to, for instance, tax imports for the carbon, the rest of the world would fall in line almost right away because they'd have no choice but to impose carbon taxes. So we've moved to the point where it becomes possible to have an enforcement mechanism. I think there's probably going to be talk about that. I don't think it's going to be decided on, but I think between now and the next meeting, people are going to be really upset because they don't have. This is the meeting that sets the agenda for the political one that makes decisions.
That's probably the key on this, is that once you have, the political will, you'll get faster action.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the ironic thing is this set of meetings could make some relatively conservative decisions on action, even though the scene is changing rapidly. It may be that the best thing could happen is that they don't. That the thing to worry about is that they limit what they're going to be able to do over the next 2 years, because there is, for the first time, the possibility of some sort of enforcement mechanism. Imagine what would happen if this conference gave the Americans permission to tax carbon on imports. Well, anybody who's exporting to the United States, and that is the world's biggest market, would be pretty much enforced to put a carbon tax on their own. Sorry, what was that?
No, just something beeping on our end.
Oh, I'm sorry. That would pretty much force everybody to put a carbon tax on at home. Once that happens, the disadvantage of carbon taxation goes away for everybody. It's an equal playing field. But you have radical pressure downward on carbon. So it's a pretty interesting, exciting time. I guess this sounds a bit boring. I'm an economist, and it seems to me that the absolutely most important instrument is a carbon tax. Most economists agree to that. We have this new eco-fiscal commission in Canada that's going to come out with essentially that conclusion, basically because it can't do anything else. That's what economic theory and that's what economic research says will work. So the question really is how fast we get reasonably uniform carbon tax across the world.
So it looks like an issue that will continue to evolve, Dr. Robertson, and I thank you for coming in to talk with us over the phone here from Laurentien University, and let's keep the conversation going.
Anytime you want to talk, James. It's a really interesting time in terms of this issue. Really, really exciting.
And I thank you for taking the time to share with our readers and viewers. I'm James in the Net News Ledger studio, talking carbon tax.